The story begins with the fact that the prediction foreshadowed that in the year 2045 the end of the world would occur on Earth. However, one person could have guessed this. It was the young man Huang Ji, who in the eyes of all strangers seemed like an ordinary fool, whom everyone laughed at. However, one day the guy woke up and saw something that shocked him terribly. Namely, that he owns all the information that was contained in the universe. Now he could see through people and know all the secrets of the world. Therefore, he took upon himself the important task of researching the future of all mankind and decided to take a dangerous path, while possessing the power of an all-seeing one. He challenged the established rules of the universe and its inhabitants, who were also its leaders. But Juan managed to break the shackles of civilization and reach the point where his every choice would become decisive in the fate of humanity. Therefore, everyone will be able to see how an ordinary guy turns into a living legend through his own actions. With his strength, Huang Ji can pave the way to a happy future. Somewhere in an unknown part of the Earth, a supernatural volcanic eruption occurred, due to which fires were scattered throughout the entire area. Local residents who were nearby the volcano suffered greatly and begged for help, since they had no place to hide. It seemed to people that the sky began to fall to the ground, and magma was about to reach their village. Huang Ji stood motionless and watched the action. It was not clear to him why there was nothing left and the end of the world still found the planet. It was not clear to the guy whether all this was really happening. The people around him were already dead, and an unknown object was hovering in the sky. The moon was blood red and the flying object indicated an alien invasion. Juan felt devastated and afraid. Suddenly, a fireball flew not far from him, crushing the ground beneath it. This began to repeat itself again and again, so this situation involved the death of all living things. Soon the guy woke up from such horror. His frightened eyes were noticed by his grandfather, who tried to calm his grandson. The young man spoke about a terrible dream that haunted him the whole day while he was sleeping. Juan, most of all at that moment, wanted to eat since nothing had entered his body for 24 hours. The grandfather immediately brought the young man the food he had ordered earlier and reminded him to go to Liang's doctor since the guy had been hit hard before. The old man already had to run to work, so he left the guy alone and once again emphasized about going to the doctor. Huang Ji calmed down his grandfather and immediately went to the poultry to feed them too. The guy understood perfectly what his grandfather was thinking. After all, everyone in the village, including his old man, had thought for 16 years that Ji was a real idiot. His parents died quite early, so Juan spent his entire adult life with his grandfather. He always told him that little Juan never cried, and until he was 4 years old he did not speak at all. Mostly he liked to just sit by the water, and since gossip spread quite quickly in the village, the man had to take his grandson to the doctor. The young Dr. Liang restricted the boy and suspected he had mental retardation. Huang Ji perfectly remembered the expression on his grandfather's face, filled with pain and despair. Then he clearly heard every word of the old man. Besides, now the guy didn't have to go to school, and while grandfather is alive, no one will harm him. But suddenly, Ji remembered that in fact his grandfather was silent then. So the question arose whose voice he could hear. In addition, there were many of them and belonged to different people. They blamed everything on the Huang family, who also had a sick child who, in their opinion, was to blame for everything. And at that moment, the young man realized that he was not hearing voices, but the thoughts of others. Later, he received a lot of information not only about them, but also about plants, nature, and the universe. The large flow of information was not always assimilated in his brain, so he often lost consciousness. However, with age, Huang Ji managed to adapt, and when passing by a group of people, he heard their every opinion. And the current one has finally learned to control and discard information that is unnecessary for him. But the only thing was that he could not control the data he received from the universe. And the other day, the guy couldn't contain his curiosity and he looked at the moon, where he discovered a terrible fact. As he learned, the moon is not only a satellite of the Earth, this is a military weapon created by an alien superior civilization to observe the Earth. Hidden beneath the surface of the moon is an empty building that was filled with mechanical means. There were also thermonuclear weapons and kinetic guns. However, the deadliest weapon for the Earth was the moon itself. Even minor changes in the satellite's position could cause tidal changes on Earth to lead to disaster. But most of all, the guy was frightened by two large figures that he saw on the moon. These were the legendary aliens from whom he received important information. It was the impact of this information that captivated him for the entire day and night, and this information influenced most of the final scenes in Juan's dreams. He was worried that aliens had been watching the Earth for tens of thousands of years, but had never done anything. However, the monsters treated people like tasty food, which provided an answer to the question of incomprehensible disappearances. In addition, until some colossal replacements take place on the planet, the disappearances will continue, and one day, space creatures will attack. And Huang Ji tried to find the answer to what people should do when this day comes, because even he, with his abilities, could not give such forecasts. However, the fate of humanity still did not depend on him, so the village boy will continue to live his own life. In the meantime, in order to take his mind off the terrible thoughts, the young man decided to stop by Dr. Liang on the way. However, there was a long queue outside the hospital. People were discussing the disappearance of a doctor, whom the head of the village and an officer came to see and still haven't left. Huang Ji understood that Dr. Liang was constantly communicating with the residents, so there was something about her disappearance. Therefore, he decided to try to discard information about the outside world, and then he could find out everything about Miss Liang. He managed to see traces of shoes and wheels. There are 5 people in one car nearby. The traces were left at 7 in the morning, so for now, according to this information, more specific ones were established. Huang saw 4 men take Dr. Liang away in their car while the woman was unconscious. Not far from the crime scene was Li Fan from the Li family. He witnessed what happened. Meanwhile, the village head turned to Officer Wang and asked where he thought Dr. Liang, who did not even report her absence, could have disappeared to. The police officer then reported that the door was open, the lock had not been broken, and there were no signs of a struggle. But for some reason, the woman did not even answer her family's calls. The officer decided to address the crowd and asked if people had seen anything. However, among the queue was Li, who knew that Dr. Liang would soon die, but the guy did not want to get into a commotion. And since Huang Ji knew everything about Fan, he told the officer that he had seen everything and could tell him. Li Fan decided to object to Huang's words, calling him a fool who is not fashionable to take his word out. However, Ji himself said that he went out early in the morning at the request of his grandfather and noticed that Li Fan was hiding behind a tree. However, the latter still denied everything. The guy's father couldn't stand it and threw his fists at his son so that he wouldn't lie and tell the whole truth. Then Li tearfully asked his father not to touch him and said that Dr. Liang had been kidnapped by several men. They were quite stern, with sharp weapons in their hands. The village chairman asked Officer Van to check everything, and the person has already found out this information. As it turned out, the doctor's parents also disappeared, and it seemed that this had something to do with the entire Liang family. The man tried to understand why the thieves had to travel so far to kidnap an ordinary village doctor. Huang Ji knew that the thieves were hiding in an abandoned old temple on a mountain, less than 1 kilometer from the village. However, the guy understood that no one would believe his words, so he decided that he had to hurry, since Dr. Liang was on the verge of life and death. Therefore, Ji was sure that he would not leave the woman in trouble. Huang Ji decided that he must first find the places where the traps are, and then he can reveal the location of the doctor. However, he had a bad feeling, and it was all because of the information. After all, if the police continue to do nothing, the woman's life will be at risk. Therefore, the guy took responsibility for protecting Mrs. Liang. Therefore, to begin with, the young man ran into the old forest where he began to look for traps in order to neutralize them as quickly as possible. There were quite a lot of them, so the thieves had a rather difficult time with this task. However, Juan is a clever guy and quickly removed everything from the trees. And when a large number of threads were collected, the young man threw himself on the ground to rest a little. He understood that if he had not scouted out the situation on his own, the police would have fallen into traps. However, now everything should go smoothly. Suddenly, Huang Ji's attention turned to the sound waves that reached his ear. It was the voice of Dr. Liang, who was screaming because she was in danger. Meanwhile, in the old temple, a woman was tied to a stick, and the men mocked her and poured cold water on her so that she would come to her senses faster. The villains were worried about where Mrs. hid the golden Buddha. However, the woman had no answer. Since they had the statue since childhood, she did not know its whereabouts. One of the men began to use physical force on the woman and said that besides the golden Buddha, 4 million of his funds were also lost. It was about Dr. Liang's parents. However, she really didn't know anything since she didn't receive a penny from them. Therefore, she was ready to die for her words. Then the thieves decided to talk among themselves. Since Liang's words sounded confident and sincere, so they had to come up with another plan to get my wealth back. Liang previously worked as a receptionist. The man thought that if he found a woman, he would get to the Golden Buddha. However, as it turned out, the girl really did not know anything and her abduction did not make any sense. The men were ready to leave Liang, but it was dangerous for them, since she had already seen their faces and, if something happened, could tell the police everything. Therefore, they decided that killing an innocent woman would be better for them and without risks. Meanwhile, Juan was very close to saving the doctor. The thieves heard that their alarm went off, and this indicated that someone was climbing the mountain towards them, so they had to run. Huang didn't expect the men to be so cruel and ready to kill Liang, so he had no other choice. The guy began to walk at the entrance to the temple to draw the attention of the criminals to himself. The young man kept muttering something under his breath, and the men asked each other who this unknown person was. They agreed that this was a local resident, but Dr. Liang betrayed her savior and said that he was seriously ill, so if something happened, he would not recognize the kidnappers. Then one of the men remembered that Huang Ji was the famous fool of the village, whom every person hated and mocked. But Mrs. Liang's words did not stop the thieves, and they decided that the guy should also be dealt with. Suddenly, Juan saw blood on the doctor's face and rushed to help her, but he was stopped all the time. The thief took out a sharp knife and, swinging at Juan, said that Xiao Liang will now have her companion in the next world. But the man failed to carry out the order. Huang Ji successfully dodged the blow and counterattacked his opponent, striking him in the lower abdomen. He twisted in pain and immediately let go of the guy, holding tightly to his abdomen to remove the pain. The main thief called his subordinate selfless, saying he always has to do everything on his own. He took his knife and pointed it at Juan and told him to quickly die from his blow. However, this did not succeed either, since Juan was good at fighting techniques and stopped the criminal with one grip. After preventing the kidnapper from taking further actions, he hit him so hard that he fell to the floor. The guy continued to deal with every scammer in that room who was in any way involved in Mrs. Liang's suffering. Each of his blows was accompanied by the bloodshed of the enemy, but Huang Ji himself remained unharmed. The fight continued for quite a long time, because the criminals eventually came to their senses and rushed to their weapons to take revenge. However, Huang Ji deftly dodged, and not a single part of his body was damaged, and every attempt to hit him ended with the thieves having new injuries and cuts. Ultimately, Juan kicked one of the criminals hard in the stomach, sending him flying. Huang Ji was pleased with himself. Everyone considered him weak and useless, but they did not know what the guy was capable of. Meanwhile, Wang Zhen could not even get up from the floor, as after receiving blows, his limbs were numb and he could not move. The manager of the criminal team looked at Juan more carefully and thought about it. No matter what the villagers said, he saw with his own eyes the real strength of the young man. This was the first time Huang Ji had used this kind of ability, and he never thought that it would go so well. However, in any case, even being a strong fighter, it is quite dangerous to get into a fight with people who are armed. But as long as Juan was able to control the state of his opponent's muscles and joints, he could foresee all their further actions in advance in order to give the best response. The surviving men began to cover their faces with their hands and begged the guy not to attack them. However, then they decided to act as a team in order to supposedly defeat Juan together. Meanwhile, Ji ran to Dr. Liang asking why she was kidnapped and under what conditions the crime took place. However, the woman was shocked by the young man's agility and strength. Then the guy replied that he only struck a few blows indiscriminately, and he couldn't have known that the thieves would turn away from the pain so quickly. He was more concerned about the doctor's physical condition. The woman begged Juan to think about himself and run from this mountain to the police as soon as possible. After all, there were 2 more criminals left and they had knives. Meanwhile, the men had just sharpened their weapons and pointed them towards Juan, telling him to give them his life. However, the guy with one movement of his body threw the criminals away from him, hitting them with his elbows. Dr. Liang freed her hands and also joined the fight to protect Juan. However, one of the men grabbed the girl by the hair and did not let her move, so Liang screamed at Ji to run away. But the guy wasn't going to give it all up so easily. Moreover, the criminal with whom he was dealing thought that the young man, at first glance, was hitting at random, but his every movement brought severe pain. In the end, Juan took the man by the hair and, pressing him to the floor, began to move him in different directions so that even traces remained from his face. Ji's opponent was weak, as he mostly sat and did not move, and Huang did a lot of physical labor. Soon, Officer Wang and a large number of police officers came running to the old temple, ordering them to lower their weapons. The officer could not understand what was happening, since the criminals lay terribly beaten. Dr. Liang was freed, and Juan walked around completely unharmed. The head of the criminal gang almost cried in despair. He had been preparing for this moment for many years, and some boy ruined everything for him. Soon the police dealt with the men and locked them up, but Dr. Liang needed rest and hot tea to recover from the terrible situation in which she found herself. The woman told the officer that if it weren't for Huang Ji, she would have been dead long ago, but he heroically saved her. The officer was pleased with the guy's work, but asked him not to run away again and not make his grandfather worry. And then, the man turned to the group of criminals and asked if Lu Zongmin was among them. This question aroused suspicion, since everyone usually called this thief by his nickname. However, no one wanted to cooperate with the officer, and he said that in this case, the criminals would remain silent at the police department. Meanwhile, Huang Ji decided that he should accompany Dr. Liang to her house, since it was still difficult for her to walk on her own after the bruises she received. The girl thanked the guy, and he replied that according to the words of his grandfather, people should act according to their conscience. And the doctor looked him in the eyes and said that the young man's grandfather was telling the truth. Soon the girl got up and approached the officer, Vanna, and said that she had to tell him something. Thus, the case regarding the kidnapping in Huazhuang Township ended successfully. Dr. Liang told the police all the details regarding her participation in the theft of the museum last year. And if she had told her earlier about what worried her so much, the stone would have been lifted from her soul as quickly as possible. In addition, the girl decided to get rid of affection from her adoptive parents. The problem with the letter containing threats was also resolved quite quickly. Lu Zongming decided to present himself as a victim in order to somehow shorten his sentence. Although many pointed out that the criminal was their leader, he denied all this, saying that he was framed. Although the police had doubts, they had no other suspects. And as long as this bore fruit, everyone was ready to talk nonsense in order to reduce their sentence. A few days later, Juan's grandfather was working in the garden with his friends when suddenly something distracted them. Dr. Liang's adoptive parents were detained, and although the police had already come to this place, they still had to appear there again. The case involved a golden Buddha because the police were trying to find out where it was hidden. As it turned out, the couple built an underwater tank together before leaving the province. They've spent almost all 4 million, with only a few thousand left. But Huang Ji was able to find out, thanks to his abilities, that the thief had more than 3 million yuan in a secret deposit. Therefore, the guy understood that the guy plans to spend it after he gets out of prison. Soon, the police and rescue service managed to get a huge underwater tank. It was there that the Tang Dynasty Golden Buddha, which was stolen from the museum last year, was hidden. But Officer Wang had doubts about such antiques. The Buddha's material reminded him more of copper. But one art connoisseur explained that the Buddha statue is much heavier than ordinary bronze statues. After measurement, it was found that its weight was very close to the volume of gold. Thus, they came to the conclusion that the inside of the Buddha is actually gold and is covered with a layer of copper on top. But Huang Ji thought differently. He felt that the density of this Buddha statue clearly exceeded the density of gold. It was mostly iron, silicon, and some unknown element. The elements that did not exist on Earth, according to Huan, were the remnants of alien civilizations. After all, this form inside the statue was a kind of high-precision instrument. It was delivered by an observer from the moon, and the recipient was an Indian monk. His name was Jodha Sita, and he was quite a famous person. In addition, the aliens were on Earth for a very long time and even left their creations, but their purpose was unknown to Huan. He wanted to continue collecting information related to space beings, but he did not have to stay in that mountain village and planned to go to the big city. While the police tried unsuccessfully to deal with the detained and missing money, Huang Ji decided to act. He went to the place he felt thanks to his power and dug up a large metal safe in which 3 million were stored. They were hidden in a cemetery, not far from the Golden Buddha, and this logic seemed rather strange to the guy. However, unfortunately, any logic and counter-logic in front of him was useless, and passwords even more so. The young man was not going to stand on ceremony and think for a long time, so he decided to just take the money for himself. Studying information about aliens will undoubtedly cost a lot of money, and this find will be a good starting capital. But first, Juan needs to leave the village, since in this place he will not be able to direct the money in the right direction. Moreover, he cannot allow his grandfather's illness to progress, and if you continue to do nothing, the old man will die in 5 years. However, the question was how the guy could ask his grandfather for time off, because he always perceived his grandson as a seriously ill child. And Juan came up with an idea. He decided that he would go to study. After all, previously he received knowledge only in elementary school due to his level of intelligence. So the grandfather was worried about the education and future life of his grandson. Therefore, having a rough plan of action, the guy decided to transfer the money home for now and discuss everything with his grandfather there. While trying to lift the heavy safe, Huang Ji accidentally stepped on the slippery, wet ground and slipped. The young man thought that a safe with 3 million cash would be easier, but as it turned out, the money weighed about 50 kilograms. He understood that he would not be able to quickly pick up the cash on his own, so he came up with the idea of finding a nearby place where he could hide the treasure. Having reached home, Huang Ji spent the whole evening remembering his adventures, and the grandfather noticed his grandson's sad mood. So he immediately inquired about the reason for it. The guy managed to calm his grandfather down, and the next morning he was already thinking about whether there was someone in the village who could take him to the city. Juan walked down the street and analyzed everyone who crossed his path. However, not a single person was able to fulfill Ji's request. Even brother Wang Meng, who had moved out of town, did not want to return there. But the man was not afraid of this city, but he was too tired of the noise and constant movement. But the head of the village, according to Juan, was in a good mood, and the boy caught the signal of information. A few days later, Zheng Xuan and Su Lingli came to the old man, whose arrival pleasantly surprised his head. Then Huang remembered that Sister Lin studied at Modo and started working after graduation. She was very kind, so the guy hoped for her help. However, the problem was Zheng Xuan. The man had two professions, translator and hacker. He had good work experience, and this was reflected in his financial condition, the size of which was 70,000 bitcoins. Huang Ji, thanks to his strength, could gain knowledge and skills by restoring the subject's memory. And if he had enough time, he could even learn hacking skills. Soon the boy went to Sister Sun, and she timidly called him to her house. There she introduced the young man closer to her boyfriend Zheng, and introduced him as Uncle Zheng, after which she quietly told her beloved that Juan had a mild form of developmental delay, but she could communicate with him calmly. Then the guy told his sister about his desire to study in the city, and then they invited their grandfather for dinner. The head of the village turned to Zheng with a request that he look at his TV since it had stopped working, and the man kindly agreed to help. After which he actually went into the house and began to examine antiques that you wouldn't see in the city. Soon, Huang Ji entered the room and began to admire Uncle Zheng's variety of skills. The man continued to do his job, and Juan decided to help a little and found the right tool. However, pretty soon the guy began to provide details of the TV without Zheng's voiceover, which greatly surprised him. The man considered Juan a guy who had certain developmental disorders, but he showed himself quite well. Then Zheng decided to ask the guy if he had experience in repairing TVs before, to which he received a negative answer. And when asked how he knew what parts needed to be submitted, the young man replied that he simply watched the process of disassembling the TV. And this was strange for Zheng, because people cannot remember that quickly. Unless they take photographs, it's not a fact that they will be able to understand. Then the man decided to conduct an experiment and quickly disassembled one of the important parts of the TV into its smaller particles. He turned to Juan and asked if he could help him and pick up this item himself. The guy began to quickly assemble everything, but his every move was made with perfect execution technique. In a matter of seconds, the device was assembled, and Ji asked Brother Xuan if he could check its operation. Soon, Sister Lin entered the room and asked about the progress of the guys with the broken TV. The girl was very happy about her brother's progress and asked why he didn't talk about his skills before. Then Lin asked Juan if he would decide to join Modo if he had the opportunity, but the guy relied on his grandfather's permission. The girl advised that Ji should just talk to the old man and explain everything, because he has real talent that just disappears in the village. Huang Ji knew that Sister Lin would decide to help him, and all that remained was to talk. But the guy was afraid of his grandfather's categorical answer, which would be decisive in his future research. Therefore, for a long time, I could not get ready to have a serious conversation with my relative. The grandfather was really worried about his grandson, who had to endure a lot of bullying in elementary school, and the same thing could happen in higher education. Then Zhang entered the conversation, who was on Huang's side, and explained to his grandfather that he was very capable and was even able to restore the old laptop on his own. The old man was surprised because his grandson always behaved diligently and didn't touch anything, but for some reason he made up his mind, and Zhang explained that this is just talent. in which it is not necessary to study something for a long time in order for it to work out. And people like Juan can show their talents, which were not characteristic of them before. The head of the village was surprised, because even the best Master Wong in their village was not subject to such technologies. Juan's grandfather himself did not understand how his grandson managed this, but he was infinitely happy with his success. The guy could read his grandfather's thoughts and heard him pay attention to his facial expression, which was so focused. After all, on other weekdays, he looked the same. The old man looked at the efforts of his grandson and finally realized that he seemed ready to let him go free. Then Zhang told about a place where you can study according to the 3+2 system. The first 2 years will teach high school material, and the remaining 3 will focus on vocational skills. Upon completion of training, students receive a diploma of higher education. Huang Ji was delighted with this training system, but the question arose whether he could cope with such a volume of knowledge. Grandfather understood everything, but he lacked confidence. In the end, we were talking about a large metropolis, and the question was whether Huan would be able to adapt, since he had never traveled outside the village. Huang Ji began to worry because he was afraid that his plan would fail. But Ling and Xiaozhang were nearby and tried to make efforts to calm the situation. The grandson approached his grandfather and said that everything depended on his answer and that he would definitely listen to him, would always be there, and would not leave the old man anywhere. Huan's words upset his grandfather. He was completely alone, and his grandson was his only close person. In addition, the man spent his whole life raising him, but he himself achieved nothing worthwhile. Therefore, I decided that I would not cripple Juana's life either. Soon, the grandfather tuned in and resolutely said that his grandson would not be able to sit with him all his life without ever seeing the world. Therefore, he should learn something new and develop his talent without letting him into the abyss. The old man came closer to Juan and hugged him tightly, as if they would never meet again. And Ji, in turn, promised not to let his grandfather down and to study well. He knew that the old man was always embarrassed for him, and therefore this time he was obliged to show everyone his skills and knowledge. The guy planned to carefully study medicine and cure his guardian, and then deal with the aliens. After sitting with the small group for a little while longer, Juan went to pack his things to leave for the city by train. The guy soon arrived at the city station by express transport, and Ling and Xiaozhang accompanied him to show him his new place of life. The girl had to run to work, so she left the boy with her boyfriend, and he, in turn, had to give a short excursion. The man was stopped by the fact that now the 3 of them would have to live together. This would be problematic, so he suggested renting a separate apartment for Juan. Lin immediately suspected something and did not understand the reason for such a statement, since there was nothing valuable in Zhang's apartment that was worth worrying about. The problem is that the man did not want to talk about his real profession, but Lin soon received a call from the director, who urgently called her to work. Therefore, soon the guys had to stay alone and meet with little sister Lin only in the evening. Suan had a large apartment and was able to set aside an entire room for Huang. The guy understood that he was not a very welcome guest, so he promised to behave with dignity. Ji suddenly thought that each of them had his own secrets, so it would be good for everyone to mind their own business and not cross paths again. After thinking for a while, the young man remembered a bookstore he saw along the way, so he asked his uncle if he could go there. The man accepted the offer and even offered to take the guy to the Xinhua bookstore. Huang Ji walked for a long time between the shelves and chose what exactly he wanted to buy, and Zhuan gave him advice on choosing literature. However, Zhang soon began to get nervous. Although he did not show it, Juan had been choosing books for more than half an hour and was detaining the man. But the boy continued to pretend that he did not know his real opinion about himself. But the young man did not want to anger the man with whom he would later have to live. Therefore, he said that he still wanted to read some books, and Zhuan suggested that he go about his business. The man was glad that he could finally leave and mind his own business, and told the guy that he would come pick him up later. And as soon as Juan was left alone, he was glad that he could finally go for that most important thing. Without hesitation, he headed towards the noisy metro, where there were a bunch of unknown people running in different directions. Among the transport stop was a large map that showed subway lines and their routes. But most of all, the guy was interested in the location of the Moto post office, where he was supposed to receive something. Huang went to the post office on his own, and there, showing his ID, he said that he had come to pick up things that had been sent 2 days ago from the village of Huazhuang. The things were quite heavy, so the guy asked the post office to borrow a cargo cart for a while. On the way, he stopped a taxi so as not to have to deal with the huge box on the subway. This package was a suitcase with money that the guy sent before leaving. And since he now had 3 million in his hands, the opportunity arose to find his own apartment. Juan came to the city center to find a new apartment, so he went to a huge apartment complex. The inside of the room was completely empty, so the guy was waiting for at least someone from the administration. Soon, a woman came out, her expression clearly dissatisfied. It was with her that the young man talked about renting an apartment. Over the phone, Juan indicated that he wanted to rent a place with 4 bedrooms and 2 guest rooms. The woman found these conditions strange from a guy who looked like a poor guy who has no money. The girl showed the first apartment. According to her, there is excellent lighting and ventilation. However, Juan saw that no one had stayed in this room for the last 7 months. It's quite cold and humid there, and there has been one suicide. The guy decided not to keep this information to himself and said that he knew about the murder and that the apartment had not been in demand for a long time. The woman was surprised, but Juan immediately hinted to her about the apartment on the floor above, which had much better conditions. These words shocked the administrator even more, since additional services were provided in your apartment, which someone outside could not know for sure. The guy decided to calm the girl down and handed over 100,000 so that she would take him to another apartment. The lady was delighted with such a pleasant bonus and was willing to do everything to leave this client satisfied. Then she thought that Juan might be some kind of cool businessman. After all, she had no other reason for the fact that he knew all the information. Therefore, she soon showed a really good apartment with excellent conditions, which completely satisfied G. After a successful transaction, the girl decided to offer Juan additional services so that he could relax. But the guy immediately kicked the lady out the door and wanted to be left alone as soon as possible. The temporary residence was ready. Now it's time to move on to purchasing a work computer and other equipment. Juan decided to use the services of couriers who were carrying parts for the computer in a crowd. They themselves did not understand technology, so they separately thanked the customer for indicating the exact store for purchase. The men unloaded orders, and the administrator continued to monitor her new tenant. Soon the guy began assembling his new equipment and was even a little worried because he had never used a computer before. There was a whole gap between theory and practice, so it took him a while to get used to using it. For Juan, suddenly too much information began to flow in, and the guy began to not feel very well due to his illness. After becoming an internet user, he began to find many different articles, but they were more like nonsense, which was useless to G. The only thing that interested him was an article about aliens on the other side of the moon. And besides, it was about a spaceship and the fact that the United States saw a UFO on the moon. A netizen with the nickname Golden Man published a lot of content that was related to aliens. Suddenly, Juan suspected that what he knew about American astronauts could have seen a long time ago, but still had not explained anything to the outside world. So he decided to check something. G wanted to analyze the user who wrote these things. However, information via the network was limited, requiring a face-to-face meeting. And it seemed strange to Juan that the man used a fake ID that was accidentally found on the internet. The guy decided to write to the user, but for 20 minutes there was no answer. Evening was soon to come, and Juan had to return to his sister. He decided not to wait any longer and just add the unknown Golden Man to his friends list. Juan's attempts to become a friend were rejected because the answer to a key question was incorrect. So Juan decided to try to log into the stranger's account himself and send the application to himself from there. The guy managed to successfully log into someone else's account thanks to the skills he received from Zhang. Juan's joy knew no bounds, as the Golden Man answered him immediately. However, she turned out to be unpleasant. The stranger immediately began to speak aggressively towards G, wishing him death for his hacking actions. Juan is not used to everyone communicating like this online. Therefore, he needed to adapt to communicating on the internet. In addition, the guy tried to answer just as boldly in order to quickly get into the groove. But as soon as Huang began to add aggression to his words, his interlocutor turned out to be a little boy, which G was mistaken about. He decided not to stop and try to video chat in order to better analyze information about the user. It seemed strange to that same golden guy that he could see Juan, but the latter decided not to give unnecessary answers. He explained that he had read a stranger's post on the internet about aliens and wanted to know where he got his arguments. Especially, how could he know that American astronauts could see space aliens? He explained that he found all these secrets in confidential FBI files. Even the destruction of the Challenger was carried out by aliens. The monsters later reached an agreement with the United States to help develop weapons, and there is an underground base in Area 51. And in fact, The United States did not land for a month, and all the live broadcasts of those years were filmed in advance. The Golden Man noted that there is no water on the satellite. Then the question arises how such clear traces could appear there. Huan couldn't stand this nonsense any longer and quickly turned off the computer. He had known about the landing on the moon for a long time, and it was the pure truth. Therefore, having calmed down a little after the conversation, the guy decided that it was time to return to Xuan's apartment. However, they agreed with the man that he would pick him up from the library, so the guy immediately headed there. In order not to arouse suspicion, he took a large number of books with the words that he had read them all. But for now, Juan decided to put the alien matter aside and first focus on gaining additional knowledge that he had missed earlier. After a delicious dinner, Juan immediately got down to studying. Now, he had the opportunity to spend all his time learning something new. He used to be bad at reading books. For the guy to remember them was a waste of his ability to perceive information. Any information that he learned or read was automatically stored in his mind. Basically, it was like photographic memory, only an improved version, and even if he lost his memory, he could immediately restore all the information that was previously stored in his head. In addition, he not only remembered all the information, but was also able to use it in practice. While other people needed a lot of time to learn something, however, knowledge must be constantly updated and not disappear into dust on a shelf. For example, he previously knew the words gravity, but had not systematically studied the corresponding theory of knowledge, so he could not obtain information about the force of attraction of an object. He didn't even need to calculate the formula, because at a glance he saw what force of attraction the object was subject to. Of course, if the cabinet is placed in a different place, the gravity will be different, but even these differences do not escape his eyes. Fundamental physics not only allows one to gain more information and strengthen one's understanding of the brain through study, but also to further explore the possibilities of its abilities, so training was necessary. The next day, Uncle Zhang woke up before everyone else. Although because of his work he again could not go to bed for half the night. The man immediately went to Huang Ji's door to wake up the young man and invite him to breakfast. However, as it turned out, the boy had had breakfast long ago and told Brother Zhuan that he could enter his room. As soon as the man entered the room, he immediately saw Huan again sitting at his books, trying to catch up. Zhang told the young man to study hard to achieve success in the future. He then added that he had some things planned for the morning, but later he could take Ji to school. Hong finished reading a book on mechanical engineering in one evening, but he could not tell Zhuan about it. The boy also thought about hospital practice, that this activity was very expensive. Although modern Western medicine already had a complete system for studying the human body, if you look at it from the point of view of traditional Chinese medicine, the mysteries of the human body are endless, and the existing complex of traditional Chinese medicine was called 409 acupuncture points, but only half were used. In addition to the 12th, 15th, and 8th meridians, Juan could recognize 9 hidden ones, as well as more than 20 side ones. Among them, the hidden ones are best to study, since hidden veins are located there. Over the course of many centuries, people gradually began to forget that qi and blood must interact. And this meridian was mainly responsible for the transmission of neuroelectrochemical signals from 5 internal organs. Then the guy began to think about what athletes are better than ordinary people. Of course, the first thing that came to mind were the muscles, which were incredibly pumped up and gave visual beauty. However, it was necessary to look deeper. We were talking about internal organs. If the muscles tense sharply, this will lead to a huge load on the human body. If you integrate a strong visceral system, it will help to quickly increase and stimulate all aspects of the function of the human body. For precise coordination control, the only method that could be used at the present time was acupuncture. This method was not very convenient, since some acupuncture points were hidden in very strange places and Juan could not reach them with one hand. But there were only 2 places a guy could start. The first controlled the circulatory system, and the second stimulated growth. They were all very practical acupuncture points. Points such as Yunmeng, Zhongfu, and Tianqi were used as landmarks, so Juan tried to insert the needles in exactly those places to make it easier to continue working. It was quite difficult, since he did not have full preparation and only tried it, and besides, he did everything on his own body. But suddenly a strong current passed through his entire body, causing pain to the young man. He began to experience severe shortness of breath, and although it did not get into the blood vessels, it did not make him any easier. Therefore, Juan came up with the idea that he should somehow fix his body so as not to miss, since there was only one attempt. Therefore, first, the guy lay down comfortably and took out a needle and decided to stick it into the abdomen. At that moment, he felt how fat deposits began to burn intensely, and his lungs and all other internal organs began to grow. Then it's time to carefully change your position, but under no circumstances remove the needles. But hold on. The strength in the body seemed to be disappearing somewhere with every second, and the guy was falling asleep. Therefore, for now, he decided to lie down and at least rest a little in order to continue his research later. Huang Ji could not even raise his hand with the phone, and every muscle of his was noticeably throbbing and filled with blood. However, the guy was pleased that the hearts and lungs had grown, making the young man's body much stronger. At that moment, he felt that 5 years of his life had been taken away. In addition, the liver and kidneys did not enlarge. It turns out that Juan's knowledge base was not enough. Therefore, he needed to cleanse his body as quickly as possible. The guy had been doing this for a long time, so soon he was called to eat, and this was very useful to restore his strength. After lunch, Brother Xuan, as promised, took Huang to school and gave him a short tour before class. Taking a closer look, one could conclude that there were no outstanding teachers in this school. Basically, it belonged to the paid category. Huan would have liked to experience student life, but had no desire to waste his time. Suddenly, Xiaoling called Zhang and offered to go shopping together, but the man was busy with Ji. The guy heard the conversation and immediately told Zhuan that he could go, and then he will find his way home on his own. And while Huang Ji was left alone, he decided to check the information first. Therefore, without going to class, the young man went to his apartment and immediately sat down at the computer, having experience with scammers. He immediately started looking online at how to stimulate acupuncture points on the body without acupuncture. Suddenly, he noticed an advertisement where an unknown person offered to practice martial arts. Martial arts were also known as combat sports. This is a skill that originated in ancient times and has been passed down to the present day. According to legend, all martial artists master special techniques. Some of them even have strength several times greater than that of an ordinary person. Some are able to fly in the air without leaving traces or even shadows on the ground. Someone had great power in wielding an iron blade as part of self-defense. When Juan was little, his grandfather often talked about how cool and dexterous he was in his youth. But this was nothing more than bragging. Most of the information about martial arts was in regular book stories. However, martial arts are techniques that increase the endurance of the body. Meanwhile, Huang continued his dialogue with the stranger, who talked about his qi. They say he can use it thanks to proper breathing, mixing it with the energy of the body. He could only train in the evening because of the special energy of the stars. He considered himself to be quite strong, as he had been cultivating for over 10 years. Ji wondered what the stranger did in his free time, and he said that he has his own business and trains for health. But Juan concluded that it was better not to ask others about their positions, since in response he always heard nothing but pompous stories. However, despite this, the stranger claimed that he had been practicing martial arts for quite a long time, and stored hundreds of videos on the disc. But the young man could not trust Qigong, since he had not previously encountered positive reviews about this art. But the research had to be stopped because soon the guy's phone rang because of Zhang Xuan. The man asked the younger man if he was at home, and when he found out that Juan had gone into the yard, he said that it was better for Lin not to know about it. Soon the young man ran home and immediately sat down to his books. Then his sister asked him about his progress in his studies, and he said that due to the fact that he had not been fond of reading before, he now decided to take up this business. Little sister was happy with Juan's success, so she wanted to tell Grandpa as soon as possible that his grandson was really sticking to his goal. However, they also needed a break from studying, so Lin suggested that Ji go out for dinner together. Soon the three of them went to a local establishment where they could have fun and eat delicious food, after which they all went home together, and Zhang, taking his girlfriend in his arms, said that now they needed privacy. Huang Ji understood what was going on, so now he wanted to turn off his mind-reading ability. He didn't have a computer here, but his phone was enough to look for information about qi energy. The guy understood everything about martial arts, but he was more worried about Qigong. Loud exclamations from the next room distracted the guy from his work, but he tried to concentrate on his own. It was a matter of terrible sound insulation, since the walls were made as if from cardboard and let every sound through. In addition, the previous course of acupuncture strengthened Juan's physical fitness, which is why his hearing also improved. and it seems that now he could control the flow of information. However, I also clearly saw ions that were emitted from the friction of bodies and distributed in the air. And at that moment, Huangji realized that now we are talking about electricity, namely bioelectricity. The human body is filled with endless electrochemical molecules. It could be a thinking process or an interaction between organs. And what supports biological activity is precisely electricity, which was an electrochemical signal that transmitted the will of the brain to all parts of the body. Moreover, there is no qi flow in the human body at all. Meridians are just a dozen major pathways with a relatively large amount of transit, and acupuncture points and hidden nodes represent the direction of vital energy. The meridians and acupuncture points of ordinary people are themselves accessible, so it is impossible to open them. Otherwise, people will be paralyzed. In other words, every person is born with inner talents. As long as the electric field can penetrate another person's body, their lifeline can be easily cut off, causing all kinds of internal damage. And if you look at martial arts, even though the skills and stamina are quite strong, there are almost no exercises to control the energy in the body. Tai Chi and metaphysics, with the highest energy usage rates, are 5% and nearly 4%. So Juan decided he had to come up with his own way of combining hundreds of strengths, combined with the concepts of hidden acupuncture points and bioelectrics. And this became the first step that must be taken to cope with the aliens. So even if it is difficult, Juan will try. 2 weeks passed unnoticed from the moment Juan discovered the secret of electrical energy. He constantly absorbed the knowledge contained in books. Even though he had thoroughly studied the books on medicine and biology offered in the bookstore, as well as the various valuable collections of online stores, it became increasingly difficult for him to acquire new knowledge as the level of knowledge continued to increase. Electricity research is also in a difficult position because current is quite harmful. Then the guy decided that it was time to stop studying ordinary books, and he decided to turn to an expert for personal advice. Zhang Wang and Li Wei are the two specialists who opened the clinic. One of them was at the 204th mark, and the second at the 305th. Jiang Wang is a woman aged 35. She is an expert in the field of pathology and has been ranked in the world for her medical skills. Li Wei is 37 years old, male specialist in respiratory diseases, and looking at the world, it also had a pretty low rating. And Huang Ji is far from a professional who spent 2 years educating himself and was able to reach a much higher level. Therefore, I was afraid that if people found out about this, the medical students would vomit. Therefore, for now, he decided to choose a person with a rating of 170,000. After waiting for about an hour outside the office door, the guy was finally called inside. There he saw Li Wei, whose rating had dropped significantly compared to before. Juan understood that information was updated in real time, and such ratings were constantly changing every minute and every second. However, the problem is that in 1 hour, more than 800 doctors surpassed Li Wei. In the meantime, the doctor decided to examine his young patient and began cardiopulmonary function. And while the examination lasted, Juan realized that the time had come to gain knowledge. With incredible speed, he received reports of clinical examinations that could not be read in books, as well as articles that could only be found at the university. Previously, this was impossible, but now Juan himself was not so simple. Combined with past acupuncture treatments, this greatly strengthened his body. Meanwhile, the doctor analyzed the physical condition of the patient, whose heart muscle was strong, whose lung capacity was large, which resembled the body of an athlete. And Juan replied that he constantly feels as if his breathing is too heavy. He hears a rapid heartbeat, and every time he thinks about it, panic arises in his body. This seems strange to the doctor, since the heart was absolutely healthy. Then Li Wei thought about referring the patient to a psychiatrist. But first, he recommended taking a chest x-ray, and then taking a blood test to rule out a respiratory infection. After that, the guy had to pay the bill for the reception. Huang Ji came out filled with incredible experience, which couldn't help but make him happy. And when the guy left the office, he decided to look again at the doctor's rating, which had decreased even more. Meanwhile, Huang Ji's own rating had increased incredibly, so the speed of progress surprised him very much. And although he did not gain knowledge, he learned about Li Wei's past. Although at first he was a promising doctor of medicine, however, because he offended the dean, he was transferred to the outpatient department, which had a severe impact on his psyche as a result. As a result, he gradually lost his professionalism as a doctor, which in turn affected his judgment and self-confidence. Same thing with Zhang Xuan. Lately, he had been reading books related to economics and was also busy with translations, so he did not have time to follow new technologies on the internet, which is why his rating in the world of hackers fell by more than 2,000 units. Training was somewhat reminiscent of counter-current swimming, but if you do not move forward, then it retreats. The whole world is changing. The information makes it clear that you cannot relax. And from Li Wei, the guy learned interesting information. Each person has their own high periods, peak periods, and fatigue periods. Even such a great physicist as Einstein only actively put forward his outstanding ideas and scientific achievements during a certain period of time. Therefore, the young man decided to try to use his ability to determine from information what period a person belongs to. Huan walked for a long time, looking at the people around him, waiting for the result of his own research. Then he saw a man in traffic who was earlier going to take part in his company's monthly performance appraisal, but as soon as he was late, the manager publicly humiliated him, causing him to lose his reputation. However, the guy was confident that that person would still show the fruits of his work and would reach the peak period quite soon. However, as a result of his research, Huan experienced an overload and then realized that he could partially predict the future. But as he later analyzed, this was only the result of his conclusion, most likely a development trend based on the information received. But the future was not predetermined. Just like the ranking of medical skills, it can change every second. The same man was angry because he was late. Then Huan walked by and laughed at him. The man heard insulting words directed at himself and even turned off the car. He was ready to slip out of the car to teach the boy who decided to mock him a lesson. But Huan managed to quickly escape, and that man thought in despair that even some young man was looking at him from above. However, he understood that there was no one to blame for this, so he decided to continue the road. But Huan made a certain chronology where he realized that first the person who reached the peak of his life got rid of anxiety. Instead of working hard, he put more energy into drilling and entered a critical period. And just like that, inadvertently Ji, who was a random passerby, decided to help. In 3 years, that person would be among the top 30,000 in the global computer industry. So now he became even more interested in how great the possibilities were for improving his magical ability. After analyzing his day a little, Huang Ji decided to relax and have a snack on the street of the new city. However, he also didn't want to waste time, so he wanted to try something new and predict the future. Suddenly, at that moment, the guy began to feel how everything around him began to change, and he seemed to be floating in outer space. A large number of mirrors appeared around him, in which Juan's reflection was visible. The guy managed to quickly return to reality, and he sat thoughtfully and tried to understand what had just happened to him. Then he realized that when he perceives absolutely all the information from the world, his future also changes. Therefore, Juan came to the conclusion that he did not yet understand his own skills well enough. Society closely binds people to each other, so sometimes any fleeting thought or random event can greatly change the direction of the future. Therefore, in fact, the shorter the forecasting time interval, the more useful it will be. However, this only applied to individuals. Then Huan thought that the whole world could be the object of the forecast, and it would be very interesting to find out what awaits humanity if aliens come. Huang Ji calmly continued to rest and thought that he was now having a fairly calm year. However, even then, and he knew that in about 5 years, a war would begin in the West. In another 10 grandchildren, America's economy would have completely collapsed, leading to its demise. And suddenly, Juan's brain woke up with the thought of 2045. Then he stood up and looked into the sky and saw a blue sun that was emitting strange energy. In addition, somewhere far away, large forests were burning terribly. And in the sky, instead of stars, those same planets were burning. The last thing Huan saw alive were flowers that seemed to be in the fog. As it turned out, strong radiation destroyed 99% of the species of living beings on the planet. But the guy still didn't know the reason for this. It wasn't an explosion of the moon or an invasion by an alien fleet. The sun never exploded, but simply turned blue. Human beings could not resist this strong light and simply died. The guy saw that this incident happened by accident, so he tried to find some way to avoid it. He came up with the idea to unite all countries and concentrate the power of all humanity because with his abilities there was nothing impossible in rapid development. He again returned to the prediction of 2045, where all living things burned and were destroyed. People fled in an attempt to protect their own lives, but the ignited fireball was too close to the planet. Huang Ji seemed to be in that world and understood that everything that was happening around him seemed somehow too much. The guy spent a long time reading in another reality, while in real life, he seemed to fall asleep on the street. Suddenly, an unfamiliar guy approached him and began to worry about Juan's condition. He said that Ji was unconscious for about 5 or 6 minutes, so he suggested calling an ambulance. Juan said that this was not necessary since he simply did not rest enough. However, what actually happened was information overload. Therefore, it was decided to avoid such a flow of information in the future. The loser told Ji to pay attention to his health as it might interfere with his studies. But Huang noted that it would therefore also be good to rest more and check his physical condition. The man was sure that he did not need it. However, Juan could see everything at a glance. He knew that a cancerous tumor was growing in the man's body, and despite the fact that now the person feels well, in a few years the disease will worsen and he will die. The guy continued to analyze the body of his interlocutor, so that he even asked why Juan was looking at him so carefully. But Juan was depressed by the thought that if he didn't do anything, this guy next to him would die in terrible pain. But for now, he decided not to interfere in the development of events and decided to change the subject and go home. Juan said goodbye to the man and emphasized that he did not forget his phone. However, Lin Li didn't understand what kind of phone he was talking about and thought that Ji was quite strange. Having finished the conversation, Juan decided to go to the Platinum District, where his temporary housing was located. He could not get over the idea that in just 35 years the world would be on the brink of complete destruction. Juan understood that if he intervened, he would be able to delay the apocalypse. But something else could happen. If for the first time the planet is attacked by a blue sun, then in the second scenario it may be an alien invasion. Since the aliens are aware of the changes in the situation on the planet, they can take measures to destroy human civilization. After all, in their eyes, people are nothing more than delicious food. And as soon as they realize that the food is resisting, it will be immediately destroyed. The guy couldn't pull himself together because of the thought that aliens would simply take and destroy all living things. Or they will wait until people kill themselves. Being honest with himself, Juan said that he had previously hoped for mercy from the aliens. They say that they will understand that he knows a lot, so they will not dare to appear on the planet. However, he soon came to the conclusion that there was no point in hoping for this, and he needed to act. Most of all, he worried about his grandfather and other close people whom he did not want to lose. Therefore, I first decided to master my own emotions. Next, you had to calculate and plan your every step. In the meantime, he decided to think about something invented. At least that day he gained a new ability to see the future. Therefore, now I had to somehow strengthen my body. Based on the generalized information regarding future research, humanity could integrate a set of advanced exercises and strength techniques. Meanwhile, the same stranger who Juan met on the street came to the Street of Tastes of Modo. There he met with his mentor, who had just decided to start eating. Not forgetting about his student, the man invited him to eat with him. Lin Li did not go to the teacher empty-handed. He carried the very goldfish that the man asked to buy. Several small fish swam in a transparent bag, which really had a golden color and were worth quite a bit. But the guy was sure that as long as the teacher could help him with cultivation, then money didn't matter. However, the man answered him that cultivating the golden pill is not an easy task, and his years would soon be coming to an end, so there was not much time left. But the teacher calmed the student and said that for now he could help him. After absorbing the pill, the guy should become very strong. The student immediately became happy, and happiness appeared on his face, so he couldn't even find the right words. Then the mentor told his ward to calm down and not get carried away by this thought. At that moment, the man understood the reason why his student could not cross the threshold of chi purification, because he was still far from perfection. Therefore, for now, the man suggested doing meditation for 3 days, after which Lin Li could return to him again. The guy accepted the advice and, taking his wallet, immediately got up from the table and went to pay the bill. However, the man did not need money from the student, especially since he would not be able to earn a pill this way. So the man said that Lin should try to anger him, and this would be the best reward. The guy knew the teacher for about a month. With the exception of buying fish and some medicines, the old man did not ask him for anything more material. And besides, he helped the guy achieve the golden tablet, which showed the level of his skill and devotion. Therefore, after thanking his mentor, Lin Li had to leave and return to meditation. Suddenly, several healthy men entered the hall with an aggressive attitude against the teacher. One of them called the mentor an old swindler and demanded his money back from him. Lin Li was surprised that with such an authoritative person for him, someone would behave so arrogantly. However, the mentor was not worried about this visit and asked one of the guys, whose name was Li Quan, why he came to him again, but he came to demand his boss's money, which amounted to 100,000 yuan. They say that if he does not return them, he himself will be left without a head. The old mentor calmly lit a cigarette and said that he had long ago donated the money he received to charity. Li Quan did not know what to do in this situation, so he ordered his boys to rush at the old man. However, the teacher only laughed at the behavior of his uninvited guests. This only irritated them more as the guys felt disrespected. Then, when asked why the teacher was funny, he replied that these guys were just stupid. At that moment, the man decided that he would finally show his student what real anger looks like. And then, he invited the guy to join the fight soon. The guy was happy that he could finally start practicing and got into a fighting position. He believed in his own strength and had already rushed into the fight, preparing his fists and rushing at one of the big guys. However, in immediate response, he received a strong blow to his arm, the pain from which then spread throughout his entire body. It didn't end there, as Lin was also hit on the head, which started bleeding. The tough guy continued to land perfect blows on his opponent, and this time he got hit in the stomach. Once he dealt with the strange guy, he couldn't figure out what it was. He looked around, and as it turned out, the old teacher had run away. He used Lin as protection, and since those guys were determined to continue the fight, they decided to take it out on Li, who was already lying there barely breathing. However, his physical condition did not stop the angry fighters, and they continued to do their job. Lin then realized that he had also been deceived and that there was no golden pill. But in fact, he himself believed in those fairy tales because he wanted to be special. Besides, the old charlatan turned out to be a good actor. He was not greedy for small money. He even treated the guy sometimes. However, he himself spent quite a bit on all kinds of materials to achieve the golden pill. Then Quan turned to him and asked if Lin knew where his teacher lived. However, the guy did not know anything, since he also fell for the scammer's trick. But the big guys didn't want to believe him and decided to disgrace the young man. Lin understood that it was all about money. And although he did not have such an amount in cash, he was ready to write a receipt for 100,000 yuan. The most important thing for him was to get out alive from those thugs, so the amount of money did not matter. Then he asked for his phone to make one call. He dialed the number and said that in 20 seconds their conversation would end, but he needed his wallet with money as soon as possible.